Hello and welcome back to the Osceola.com's Seminole Sidelines. My name is Nick Carlisle, staff writer and recruiting writer for the Osceola.com. Joined as always by head editor Bob Ferrante on this Monday afternoon. Bob, we have made it. It is game week. It is truly time to start getting excited. There's the buildup. There's the hype. Game week just means a little bit something more. Sorry, SEC. This actually means more. Game week actually means more. When you get down and you could really start counting down those days and those hours. But big news coming out of Florida State this morning. Mike Norvell releasing the first depth chart for Florida State football for 2025. You were there earlier today at the press conference. Why don't you start out just kind of recapping your thoughts on what Mike had to say, maybe your biggest takeaway from some of the coach speak this morning, and we're gonna get into everything. We're gonna go position by position, go back and forth, just talk about some of the surprises and some of the standout names that have surprisingly appeared on this depth chart.
I did not expect to see Chase Lofton in the depth chart, and he's there, as a receiver. I think that was one of the ones that sort of eyebrow raised, but it's very understandable. We had written a little bit in the spring about position versatility with this roster. And if you've seen Chase Lofton's highlights, you go, that looks like a receiver. That looks like a bigger receiver who could be a tight end eventually. But I think with a Lewayne McCoy injury, he's out, for this game. Mike Norvell calling that today. You start looking at other options, start looking at who's dependable, who can you really count on. And I think Chase Lofton's name popped up, makes a lot of sense. The other one, Nick, I didn't fully expect to see Ashland Barker as the starting safety at one of those spots, but we've heard a lot of good things about how Ashland works. I think Mike Norvell said today, hasn't played a ton of football, injured, I think, in high school, junior college. He basically went a year, sat out. They were trying to preserve a lot of his eligibility, trying to get him to a power school. So a neat backstory for Ashland to be in this position. I think how many guys are going to appreciate being on that field on Saturday? I think guys like Ashland Barker, Columbus area, a little close to those Alabama fans, right? So, I mean, that's a guy who I think is also going to appreciate it. I think those were two of the biggest, maybe eyebrow raisers, but there are some others too. Which one stood out to you?
Donnie Hybert from the top rope being thrown off the Hell in a Cell by Undertaker. That is the degree of which the shock and awe took over my body when I saw Donnie Hybert lining up behind Earl Little at the rover position. Now, maybe that there could be a lot of different things in terms of what that means. For all intents and purposes, that could have been Conrad Husty's spot before he got dismissed from the team. What is it, a week and a half ago at this point? That could be all it is. That could be just a nod to Hybert, who, of course, is a former walk-on. Obviously, no walk-ons now. Everybody's on scholarship. Could be just a nod to a guy that has clearly worked his butt off, and we have seen him work for all the years that he's been at Florida State. How much is that actually going to come into play? I feel like Earl is probably going to be playing 99.9% of those snaps, but you never know in the event of an injury. That was an interesting name to see there. I would have. But even so, over somebody like a Max Redman, a true freshman, you wouldn't think that Max Redman was going to see the field this year. But even to just not be on the two deep and having that walk-on take that spot, that was super surprising. Just in general, a lot of younger faces. You talk about Lofton, which a little bit surprised to see him listed as a wide receiver. I would have expected him to be listed as an or on the tight end side and with an or distinction. The fact that Florida State wasn't really rushing him to put on weight this spring and summer, I think kind of told you a lot about where they see him in his contributing role this season in particular. See how he does as a pass catcher. And of course, that is what you want out of Chase Lofton. That's why they went so hard after him when they recruited him, his ability to be really a matchup problem everywhere on the field. It's interesting to see him being specifically listed as a wide receiver, though, Bob, because it's sure it's his skill set, but especially with the fact that he was dinged up on that first practice that we got to see way back in the beginning. Now, it didn't look like it was anything serious, but he was limited for the rest of that first week as well. So to see him get that starting, or not starting nod, but that 2 deep nod at wide receiver as opposed to tight end, really curious. What's kind of your opinion of all of these younger names in general that are being seen on the depth chart? Guys like Boggs, who we kind of assumed was going to get that starting nod. To see it actually on paper is fascinating. Shamar Arnaud on the 2 deep at corner as a true freshman. Some others that we'll get into a little bit later. I think this is going to be a storyline for as long as we're going to be talking about this.
Right.
Good that there's true freshmen playing. Bad that there's true freshmen playing, if you know what I mean. Like where is it? Is it an indictment of the upperclassmen that you're being overshadowed by some true freshmen, or is this really true talented freshmen that are coming in and it's something to show? To your point earlier before the show, this is something that you show your 2026 kids and say, hey, look how many young guys are recruiting here, or how many guys are contributing here, right?
And it's an interesting discussion, like you wrote over the weekend. 100+ prospects are going to be in the stand at Doak, and that's a select group. That's not just 100 guys who, hey, I'd like a seat for Florida State and Alabama, please. These are the guys that, Mike Norvell, Derek Ray, the coordinators, the coaches really, really want to be in the stadium, and hopefully focusing on Florida State and not Alabama as a prospect. I'm very curious about this. I think Mike Norvell's got 7 true freshmen in the depth chart. If you include Bruno Royce as the backup kicker, we may not see him at all, but potentially you're going to see half a dozen true freshmen on Saturday. And I think that's a big, big thing for Mike Norvell to show the 2026 class. These guys are getting some snaps early. That's a big deal. Guys want to play. I think that's a determining factor. Now, on the other hand, it's not great if you are a veteran who's put in the work for years and years and years, and you're going, man, this guy just got here. He's already beat me. There's no transfer portal, man. So go to work hard. This is a competition. I think we all know Mike Norvell's depth charts are pretty fluid. This is going to change week to week, game to game, situation to situation. But it's about getting your athletes out there. And I think we think Chase Lofton, that's an athlete. That's getting somebody out there in a position to help you make plays. We're also, I think, for the second year, seeing a tight end in a little bit of a different role than what he would be long term. Like we did see Landon Thomas and Amari Williams split out, not true tight ends last year. We're going to see Chase Lofton potentially, again, split out, not a true tight end. Florida State's recruiting some really good athletes at this position. And I think, again, get those guys on the field. That's the bottom line.
Let's just rip the Band-Aid off, Bob. Let's go position by position here. We've got our handy-dandy custom layout here. This is the official depth chart that Mike Norvell and Florida State football released earlier this morning. And, there are some obvious position groups here that when you take a look at it, you're like, that's a no-brainer. Duh. But I think when you go through a lot of the positions here, there's 1 or 2 names that you just kind of take with you and say, oh, either A, that hype was justified, or B, what are you doing here? Like there's at least 1 name per position group, and that's exciting because I feel like last year we all went in with expectations on who was going to be at what position, who's going to be starting. There seemed like there were more surefire starters than there were this year. There was definitely a more of a pecking order to things where the competition this fall has seemed to be at another level. And that goes for a lot of position groups that you see on the depth chart here. Quarterback, I don't think there's any surprises here. Maybe if you want to call it a surprise that Brock Lynn is 2 over Kevin Sperry. And of course there is that or designation there. You thought that maybe, just maybe, with Brock's injury in camp, Kevin Sperry might take that number 2 slot. And sure, I think there is a very good chance, and we've talked about this on the show before, that there is a good chance that he's going to see some valuable reps against East Texas A&M and Kent State in weeks 2 and 3. But are you surprised at all to see Brock number 2 there? It's not really surprised because you think he is supposed to be there, but considering the camp injury, there may have been like a little devil on the shoulder that said, Kevin Sperry is impressing, especially Malzahn. He might find himself in the number 2 spot.
I think if the opponent's different, you're definitely willing to put Kevin Sperry out there in a number 2 position. If this is Duquesne or, pick your weaker group of 5 opponent in a guarantee game. But because this is Florida State, Alabama, because of the juice behind it, I wonder if you want a little bit of experience. A guy like Brock Glenn, just the nerves are going to be more settled than Kevin Sperry. I'm not saying Brock Glenn is a better quarterback. I just think for this situation, it makes sense. There is a roadmap, an explanation for the why.
And, of course, Jalen King expected to redshirt this year. This isn't really a surprise to not see him on the depth chart, even though there's always kind of that conversation when you bring in a guy that's moving up a level who does have experience. You bring him in for that experience. But it was the plan to redshirt him. Not a surprise to not see him on the 2 deep initially. Going down to running back here, and I thought this was interesting. We've kind of gotten a little bit more clarity on where that Jalen Lucas guy is going to show up in terms of this depth chart. He is showing up at running back. He is showing up in the starting spot above Usman Kroma. I think it's an interesting distinction right above that, Roy Dell Williams or Gavin Sawchuk. I think you and I were probably on the same page when we thought, okay, Roy Dell 1, Usman Kroma 2 in both the starting positions on the depth chart and maybe some or designations there. But Jalen Lucas getting the start there at that second running back. And I think it's super hard not to supercharge the or designation, but I do find it interesting that there is an or designation between Roy Dell Williams and Gavin Sawchuk. Do you?
Yes. And let's get it out of the way first. I mean, Mike Norvell is listing 12 on his starting 11 on offense.
Right.
He's done this historically. He's done 2 running backs historically through past years. How does that change in the Gus Malzahn offense? How many times do we see 2 running backs? Again, I've kind of said consistently through the offseason, Jalen Lucas, you can call him a running back, an athlete, a receiver, figure out a way to get the ball in his hands through offense or special teams. To me, it's hard to compare Jalen Lucas to Usman Kroma because it's almost like you're comparing different types of
polar
music,
opposites if you want
types
to.
of movies. It's not the same thing. It's just like get them both out on the field because they can be difference makers, but they're not comparable in any way.
No, they're so different. I mean, there's a 5'9" scat back and a 6'2" freak of nature. They're polar opposites on the spectrum there.
Yes.
It's I didn't notice that. Like I noticed it, but I didn't kind of put how different those two are until you said something. A big name that's missing, Cam Davis.
Yeah.
And I don't want to overreact to that, but it has been relatively consistent since this new staff got here that Cam Davis was, let's just say, not the favorite in terms of what his skill set is to some of this new coaching staff, to Malzahn, to primarily to Malzahn. Let's just call it what it is. That was consistently, it's like, they're not sure about Cam. They like other backs better. Now we get here into fall. Cam Davis isn't even on the 2 deep after being, I can't remember. Was he a starter last year? Was he a starter for the Ireland game on that depth chart at that second running back position?
I think David Johnson said they played 5 running backs on that first drive. Cam did start games, but what David Johnson said this year when he was asked about Cam in camp, he's got to learn to be a better pass blocker. I think that was remarkable, that all this discussion about how good Kroma is in pass protection, and then there's the storyline of, well, Cam has to improve in that area. Again, that's very, very telling that the coaches are messaging out that through the media to the fans.
Yeah, it's got to be a really heartbreaker for Cam Davis, too, because you know that he loves this place and you know he wants to be out on that field, especially after the season that he had last year. He felt like he probably needed a mulligan, wanted to do some things better, slim down a little bit. Not to say that he's not going to get reps, because there are definitely other guys here that are not listed on this 2 deep that are probably going to get reps. Sam Singleton's going to get a couple of reps. Keziah Holmes is going to get a couple of reps. you would assume that Cam Davis is going to get a couple of reps too. But that talent level that was not in front of Cam last year due to injury is installed this year. So it is going to be a little bit more difficult to be a contributor, especially if your pass blocking isn't up to par. Down to the tight ends, and I thought this was interesting. I found it absolutely fascinating that Amari Williams was number 2 here as opposed to Landon Thomas, and there is an or designation there. But also no Marqueston Douglas, no mention of Bryson Estes. Now, I wasn't expecting them to be on the 2 deep necessarily, but I do think that when you're pairing the 2 run blocking, pass blocking tight ends in there, and they're off the 2 deep, it kind of shows you a little bit more about what Gus wants to do here in terms of the versatility of the tight end room. If you want to bring up versatility on the tight end room, there's probably no 2 players better than Randy Pittman and Amari Williams, who obviously Amari Williams is he mentioned multiple times on the steps? Or no, he's mentioned at tight end first, I think. He's not even listed at Jack, which
That's
is
interesting too, right?
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
So I think I was on record earlier this year saying, no, he's definitely going to appear more at defensive end than he is at tight end. And hey, you're not going to be right all the time, but it is interesting that Amari is here at tight end right behind Randy Pittman, and then Landon Thomas. Not necessarily a surprise to see him kind of third in that pecking order, consider he was banged up during the fall, but to not see Biscuit there too I think is really interesting, Bob.
I think if you're putting your potentially most productive guys out there who can catch, who can block, who have versatility, Randy Pittman's the easy answer. And I still think you could argue Randy Pittman might have the most catches by the end of the season of any Florida State receiver, running back, tight end. Randy Pittman might have more than anybody by the end of the year. I would put Amari Williams out there quite a bit too. Does this tell you how much he's going to play Jack? I'm not buying that. I still think he's going to factor in on defense, maybe against different opponents, especially opponents that don't run like Alabama's going to run. I'm not sure you want to put an Amari Williams out there. We'll get to Jack down the road, but just for the tight end discussion, I think it's important to address Amari might be more valuable for this game as a tight end. Landon Thomas coming off that injury, I think we know he's a guy who can be a good blocker, also very athletic, not as athletic as the 2 guys ahead of him on the depth chart, though. I didn't expect to see Bryson Estes here. I get that. The Marqueston Douglas thing is very, very weird, but I would still say, is it possible Florida State goes 3 tight ends in a goal line type of situation, and you want to throw in some of these bigger bodies? Do you want to throw a Bryson Estes out there? Do you want to throw a Marqueston Douglas out there? Again, just because they're not in the depth chart, you said this earlier, there still could be value as far as what they bring in certain situations. I haven't studied Gus enough to say he does use personnel groupings with 3 tight ends, but I just think in a goal line type situation, you might say, oh, this tight end room is very, very intriguing. Mike Norvell talked about just the adaptability, the different body types there. There's a lot to play around with if you're Mike Norvell and you're Gus Malzahn.
Do you think the rigmarole during the spring window of Marqueston entering the portal and coming back made a difference at all? Or is that just fan casting? Is that just projecting? Because I don't know. When he first came back during the fall window, I thought, okay, surely it's going to be a room of Amari, Landon, Marqueston. I can't remember if Randy Pittman was committed that time. I can't remember who came first, the biscuit or the egg. I can't remember who exactly came first, but do you think, I don't know, is it projecting to say that maybe that was a sign of things to come, that Marqueston popped in the portal momentarily spring? Maybe he saw this coming and decided to come back and stick back anyways because there weren't going to be any better options for him. Is that a wild theory, or do you think they're reading some tea leaves that may actually be something to hit on?
Yeah, so this thought did cross my mind today too, right? So peeling back the curtains a little bit, Marqueston did go in the portal. It was reported by a couple of news outlets. He did. We talked to him. I talked to him after the announcement that he was going in the portal. He said, I want to go somewhere where I can be a bigger part of the offense as a pass catcher. Totally get it. It's your last year of college football. The reasoning makes perfect sense. What happened after that, as far as did his mom or dad or agent or high school coach just not hear from the right people? And between, I think that was a Saturday and then a Tuesday where Mike Norvell confirms, Marquison's still on the roster. There's a reason why.
It was a short window.
But it was a weird scenario. And I think Mike Norvell took some criticism for taking back Marquison, quite honestly. So how does all that factor in? I think Mike Norvell is going to play the guys that are going to be impactful at the end of the day. But I just think this is a really good tight end depth chart too.
Yeah.
And
worlds better than last year's.
I've been hitting that button throughout the offseason. I think this is a better tight end group. And if I'm wrong, I will own it. But I think this is a better tight end room.
Jason Purdue coming in with a question. Are we happy to see veterans getting passed on the depth chart by freshmen who transfers out due to getting left off? Jason, we kind of had this conversation earlier in the show, but just to kind of recap, unfortunately, it's probably a little bit of both. There are definitely some freshmen that are getting some playing time here. That's an indictment in terms of the how the room has shaped up. But there are other cases where I do think that these freshmen have genuinely come in and earned their spots. One of these kids, Javon Boggs, who we're going to talk about in a second. But there are guys like Shamar Arnaud, who has gotten a lot of praise from Norvell, specifically in the second half of camp leading up to this final week of practice. He's kind of showed up more and more. I think it's a little bit of both, and you kind of have to take it glass half full, pinch of salt. There are definitely some prizes on this roster, or on this depth chart rather. If you're looking for a guy who might transfer out due to being left off, Cam Davis, I feel like there's a danger there for reasons that we've kind of already talked about on the show. I think there's a danger there, which sucks to say because, as I said, he definitely loves this university. He remained committed to this university all 2 or 3 years of his recruitment process. So I think there's a big danger there. And look, there's always going to be some members on the offensive line who just can't make the cut or can't win out in their position battles that end up hopping in the portal just because that's such a competitive position group. But if I had to pick one guy, and we're going to go through the defense and the rest a little bit later, I think probably Cam Davis is the name that pops out to me. Wide receivers, Bob, unless you have anything to add to that.
I think, if you watch the press conference, Mike Norvell mentioned this toward the very end about freshmen. He said he wouldn't be surprised if by the midpoint of the season, double-digit freshmen are contributing in some manner. Now, again, what that means, snap counts, not necessarily on the depth chart. Special teams can be included here. If he wants to include special teams, he can probably find 10 if we're already looking at 7, including a backup kicker. So I think the puppies are pushing for playing time. Again, that's a great thing for the recruiting effort in the big picture.
What do you think about that? I mean, it's interesting because the difference in context between the puppies pushing last year, it was a youth movement by necessity, or really desperation, if you want to call it that. Panic, maybe, is a word that I would use. Panic, desperation, lack of other options. To see somebody fresh and pushing for starting time this early, it's a little bit different. And it makes me wonder, maybe you do lean more heavily into, okay, no, these freshmen are just talented. They hit on some freshmen. But you're never really going to know until you see the product on the field. And, maybe these freshmen are going to have freshman mistakes. That's going to go with the territory. But maybe it really just is the case that they hit on some freshmen. I think they really did hit on Boggs. Now, Boggs is a case where, this wide receiver room is it's a little shaky at best. But with everything that we've heard from players, coaches, it has been consistent. It has been wire to wire. From the moment that he got here in spring till seeing his name on the depth chart today, Boggs has been wire to wire. So the context in how these freshmen are being brought in, winning the starting job in fall camp versus being brought in out of fear, desperation, panic, hair loss, clipboard slamming on desk. It's definitely a little bit different, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think a couple of things that kind of hit me too is you can almost draw up a depth chart to some extent based on the transfer portal and who doesn't depart early through the NFL draft and through the portal. Like, look at the offensive line, and we'll get there eventually. But that offensive line, we could have mapped that out in late December around New Year's Day. Based on who you've brought in, who you're paying money through NIL, then revenue share, and NIL now. You have those types of scenarios. I also think, is this, Nick, a little bit of shaping Mike Norvell's, I'm not sure what the right word is, but his notoriety as a portal king type, and it worked in 22 and 23, and it didn't work in 24. Is he trying to shift that mindset among mom, dad, high school coach, prospects, and say, yes, we're hitting in the portal, but we're throwing these young guys out there because they are ready too. I do think he's trying to message that to a lot of prospects, and they're significant helpers in the decision-making process.
Yeah, I didn't think about it necessarily that way, because there is that stigma with Norvell. I mean, he was the portal king for 2 or 3 years there. Obviously, last year was what it was. You have all these guys that were committed to you for the 2025 class, and obviously there was a large number of those guys that came on after the season started as they had to pick up the pieces of this recruiting class. But there are definitely a number of them that committed to the program for a bunch of different reasons. And then the early playing time was a big incentive in terms of why you stuck around despite going 2-10. Guys like Kevin Wynn, who, by the way, I fully expected to see his name behind Darrell Jackson at nose tackle if he didn't get hurt and wasn't unavailable for this upcoming game. Loane McCoy and Kevin Wynn were the two that were name dropped by Norvell today as specifically being out for this next game. They are expected to have a more speedy recovery. I think this is more about protecting them from themselves than anything. We could see Kevin Wynn's name at the second nose tackle slot next week. There's definitely an argument to be made there. But you have all these guys that came in 2025 that playing time became more of a reality for them, and now like that to say it is one thing, but to actually see it and see it lived out is another thing. It sticks in my mind, Bob, but Usman Kroma saying in multiple interviews leading up to him flipping to Florida State, Mike Norvell has never lied to me. He ain't lied about one thing. Mike Norvell ain't lying about playing time right now. If you are a 2026 recruit, there is playing time available for you at Florida State. And I think that's really interesting. Wide receiver. I know we tried to segue into wide receivers like 3 times now. Squirrel White, Deuce Robinson, Javon Boggs. Not a surprise. That's the 3 that we were hearing. Mekhi Danzy, BJ Gibson, and Gavin Blackwell, Elijah Moore. 2 pairings of the or designation at that specific position. You and I talked last show about who is ideally going to be that second team of wide receivers. Do you think that they got it right? Do you think that these people, or these prospects, these young kids rather, do you think this is who should be in these positions? Does it pass the eye test for you?
I think so, and I'm very curious. They've said I think 5 or 6 receivers will play. Obviously, they're listing 8 guys. That's not realistic. How healthy is Gavin Blackwell, for example? I'd still rather see Elijah Moore versus Gavin Blackwell.
I think Elijah Moore is ahead of Blackwell right now, to be honest with you. That might be a seniority pull, but.
And I mean, there is a difference between Mekhi Danzy and BJ Gibson too. I mean, 2 totally different body types. I think Danzy, again, they called him a long strider. That's track speed. If you want to run a couple of deep flies, you're going to probably send Mekhi Danzy out there at least a couple of times, maybe if for no other reason to wear out a couple of DBs and make them run, pretty fast, pretty hard to keep up with Mekhi. I think Mekhi has a chance to be a home run type. How often is he going to get the ball? I think it's a decent question. I also lean toward you're going to see a lot of Deuce, Squirrel, and Boggs,
And Jalen Lucas.
And Pittman, and Jalen Lucas. Like, if I'm thinking about who are the 5 guys who are going to catch the most passes on the roster, regardless of position, I think we probably named them. Those are kind of going to be the 5. And then you're going to start to get into, okay, how much does a ball find Mekhi Danzy? How often does it find Elijah Moore? If I'm banking on a guy to have a second-year jump, I still think Elijah's a guy I really want to see more of. This is his year to get that jump.
Question here. Oop, wrong one. Thoughts on Shyheim? He started multiple years in a row, now listed as a backup. Seems like a program buy, but how comfortable are we that he stays? Well, this is his final season of eligibility, so he's gone one way or the other. I believe that's right, Bob. I think he's a redshirt senior at this point. I think he's done after this year. But to the point, to see him as a backup, personally, I'm not surprised to see him here, given the chatter behind the scenes in terms of, I mean, it was evident relatively early on that some of these young safeties were overtaking not only Conrad, but overtaking Shyheim as well. I don't know what happened, Bob. I don't know where the lights turned off for Shyheim. I just don't think he's the same player anymore. There is something that has changed with his mindset or something to where it has held him back or made him regress. And I think there are players on this roster that are hungrier than he is. I think that was shown last year in terms of his attitude, in terms of how he played, and just his attitude in general. And granted, we're saying this about the team's leading tackler last year too, which is kind of crazy to say. But there was some switch in the track along the trip that has just made very similar, actually, to like Darius Washington and Maurice Smith. It feels like last year, to where there were guys that had started for multiple years that you felt you could depend on, and then just something changed, whether it was the coaching or the responsibility or the chemistry with your team. Like something changed to where you are just not performing at the level that is expected of you. To see Ashlyn Barker there, to starting at that number 1 safety spot, is kind of wild. And that's no discredit to Ashlyn Barker, who, I don't know if this was prior to the show or at the beginning of the show, where this is a guy that came from JUCO, step up. It's taken a little bit more time to come along, but you saw him flash multiple times last year. To see him in front of Shyheim, Bob, is maybe not surprising, but definitely eye-opening.
And I think when we did the depth chart over the weekend, projecting what we thought, Mike Norvell could show, I think we had Edwin Joseph starting, KJ Kirkland also starting, and now in Mike Norvell's depth chart, he's got them as an or at 1 safety spot. I think there's still a little bit of Tony White's push. Remember that epic kind of speech about you want to have a seat on the bus or not? That's going back to August 10th. It feels like it's been a long time since then.
Yeah.
But how much of that Tony White push is the reality for a lot of these veterans? Is something that, he didn't want to name names. He didn't need to name names. But I think people needed to hear the head coach of the defense is not happy. And I think that, how does that resonate? The Shyheim issue is maybe related and maybe not. But I think there's a lot of, you need to hear the tough talk. And I think Shyheim can still factor in here. Again, this depth chart is going to...
It'll probably be rotated.
Yes.
Series, either every 2 series or side to side. Ooh, looks like we lost the graphic there. I don't know if you can pull it back up, Bob. It might be my end. The old laptop died, which is fun and exciting. I don't know if you have the graphic. Maybe I can set it to you, get it back up on the screen here. Technical difficulties are always exciting and fun. Maybe if you pull it up as a presentation.
I will try.
In the meantime, just going through the offensive line, I think everybody that we expected to be in that starting 5 is there. But what Herb Hand said later last week about your top 5 not necessarily being ordered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across each position. Sometimes your second string tackle is going to be your fourth best offensive lineman, or basically there was some flexibility to it. I think the order in which we saw the starters are unsurprising. You have Hansen left tackle. I can't remember if Medley was left or right. I got to be looking at the depth chart right now. But Pettibon at center, Pettis at right tackle, and then you have some flexibility at right guard, whether that be Rizzi, who is listed as an or at multiple positions. Obviously, Chavez Thompson, the true freshman, getting a shout at center. It's because Florida State doesn't have any other centers. But in terms of the offensive line, in terms of who's there, it doesn't sound like it. And at least talking to listening to Norville, it doesn't sound like everything is 100% there or 100% finalized. The starters are all there in terms of where you expect them to be, how they're going to contribute, but maybe at right guard, maybe figuring out who's next up, 5, 6, 7. That's where there's decisions to be made.
I think this offensive line is essentially what we all thought. Again, going back, you make these decisions in December when you recruit some of these high-end guys. You're paying them a lot of money. Again, looking back at NIL rev share, the Chavez Thompson thing kind of came out of nowhere until Herb Hand said it maybe last week. I didn't really expect him to be in the mix as a center. I kind of thought that makes sense for Jacob Rizzi. That makes sense for Richie Leonard maybe to slide over, because Herb had suggested, hey, one of your starting guards could be your backup center, for example. I even was questioning, hey, is Micah Pettis the right tackle? Is he your left tackle if Gunnar Hansen is injured for some reason? So I still think there's some shifting pieces on the offensive line. Again, there's who you trust in camp, then there's who you trust in an actual regular season game, and it is Alabama. Yeah. If this were Duquesne, if this were Kent State to open, you're probably throwing out some other options and just testing out the continuity to see how it works. But I think, again, when you've got Alabama as that game one, you make a lot of decisions based on who am I going up against on that defensive front when you are the offensive line coach, because you can't make the personnel mistakes and put them in tough situations when you know what's going to happen, because an Alabama defensive line is completely, legit as far as what kind of pressure they can put against you and pressure Tommy Castellanos.
Let's see if I can get this back into working here. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everybody. We'll get this depth chart back up here. Moving on to nose tackle or defensive end, James Williams and Jaden Jones. Jaden Jones, definitely a name to be reckoned with in terms of the first couple of weeks. Fell off a little bit in terms of being mentioned in the last week or so, and maybe that's just, hey, we're focusing on other guys here. The other guys are flashing at different times. First of all, how good is it to see Jaden Jones on this 2 deep? And second of all, to be behind James Williams after all is said and done. Obviously, James Williams is going to be your pass rusher on that weaker side. What do you make in terms of who's lined up on this defensive line? And obviously, you got Daryl Jackson, Daniel Lyons on nose tackle. I got to look at the rest of the depth chart. We'll get it up momentarily, guys. But how are you feeling about how that defensive line is shaken out after maybe a little bit of a call out by Tony? I definitely think Tony was talking about some of the defensive line when he's talking about he needed to see some more effort from his defensive line.
I think the biggest takeaway from the defensive line is these are bigger bodies, and it's not Alabama big. That's not the discussion I'm trying to start. It's not SEC versus Florida State. It's you're throwing some big defensive ends out there. There are no, let's say, Patrick Payton type defensive ends who are the leaner guys. And shout out to Nick for getting the depth chart back up there.
Yeah, there we go.
When you've got Jaden Jones at 257 on one edge, instead of here's a 240-pound pass rush type exclusive guy, I think it shows you that they know Alabama's going to try to run and run it to dictate throughout the game. So Florida State's going to match it with the biggest bodies, potentially the best run stoppers that they've got. So Jason Jenkins, again, Tennessee experience. He's seen Alabama, knows some of those linemen. I think that's valuable. Darrell Jackson, obvious that guy was going to be there. James Williams, a guy you trust in terms of the 3-3-5 scheme. And then, yes, Jaden Jones. I think you're going to stand up and probably applaud a lot of guys on Saturdays. I think that's among those guys that as a fan, you're going to say it's great to see Jaden Jones back, because you need this type of depth. You need 6, 7, maybe more guys, because injuries happen. You need to have that type of depth for a rotation up front.
To see Jason Jenkins at that starting spot on what we would assume is that strong side defensive end spot on the defensive line, to see him there starting after being banged up for the first week and a half or so of fall camp, how impressive is that? Because I was honestly expecting to see Deontay McCray get the start there and have Jason Jenkins be second because of that injury. And also shout out to Mandrell Desir. The Desir twins have been brought up consistently throughout fall, as well as guys that are maybe, I don't want to say punching above their weight class, but definitely making an impression early with their work ethic, their drive, their pursuit, their explosiveness. Maybe not so much developed physically to be on that defensive line starting right away, but they're going to give you those effort reps. So shout out to Mandrell Desir and, of course, Darrell as well. But to see Jason Jenkins starting there, are you surprised it's not Deontay McCray?
Again, this is one I missed on. I'll admit it. On Saturday when we published our depth charts, I had Deontay McCray, who, again, we've heard has had a really, really good camp. Jason Jenkins, though, I think you're going a little bit more on just, I hate to say the raw talent is better, because it doesn't, like, Deontay McCray is very talented.
Yes.
But man, Jason Jenkins, I think high end is a little more high end. I would also argue if Jason Jenkins was on a little bit of a pitch count, so to speak, how much are you going to the bullpen? How much are you leaning into Deontay McCray there? Whereas a guy like James Williams maybe can go a little bit more without being subbed out. Look, I think this is going to be an interesting discussion. How much can you substitute your defensive front? How much does Alabama try to go first down tempo and push and push and push to prevent Florida State from substituting? So I think there are some storylines within the depth chart, within the substitution patterns, but it's cool. It's really cool to see Jason Jenkins get that nod.
If they go to a 4-man front or like a bear front, who's going to be that fourth guy in? Is it McCray? Do you think it's probably Williams, Jackson, Jenkins, and then McCray, or do they bring a linebacker down? Like it because we've heard so much about how multiple this defense is and how many fronts and looks they're going to throw at you. I don't want to say that this depth chart doesn't matter, but does it? If they're going to throw multiple down sets at you, is everything going to be so flexible on the defensive side of the ball that none of this is ever going to really matter in the end, do you think? Or is this actually pretty vindicative of where these guys are going to be lining up for the most part?
Yeah, I was kicking that around too earlier. It's like, okay, are you really going to have Omar Graham and Stephon Thompson as a jack overthrowing Deontay McCray in with that starting 3? So if you go 4-man front, I'm going to keep Deontay and Jason Jenkins out there because I want, again, big bodies, stop the run, etc. I just didn't see no trashing Omar Graham or Stephon Thompson. I didn't see them as the described jack type in terms of what the coaching staff was really looking for. But I would also argue how much of this is potentially matching up toward Alabama, toward the quality of that offensive line, the quality of that run game, even without Bam Miller. I just wonder if part of this is just saying, we like these guys for this particular game. But again, we're all kind of new to this 3-3-5. We've seen a little bit of it. We've watched some Nebraska tape. I watched enough, like you said, Nebraska is not just a 3-man exclusive front. They're going to go 4. They're going to go 5. What we don't have a great feel for is the substitution patterns, is some of these new pieces.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. This is it is important to note that this is going to be skewed towards Alabama. If you want to consider it this way, Omar Graham and Stephon Thompson, they're going to be your heavier hats, as opposed to throwing an Amari Williams there at that jack position, which is what we are led to believe that position is more often than not going to look like. That's going to be your flexible linebacker, defensive end who can do a little bit of coverage, but primarily being used as a pass rusher there. Shout out to AJ Cottrell on the 2D behind Elijah Ehring at what I would assume is that Mike linebacker position. This is a kid that loves to play football. He's a hard hitter. He's going to give you those effort reps. And there are no walk-ons on obviously everybody's on scholarship, but being a former walk-on for Cottrell, this is really great to see him. A little bit also concerning about some of those younger guys in the linebacker room, like a Jaden Parrish, who not able to crack the depth chart in his second year. To what degree are you concerned that some of those younger linebackers are not cracking the 2 deep, or are you more excited in the fact that Cottrell is a former walk-on that caught our eye frequently as a guy that's going to give you hard-hitting quality effort reps?
Yeah, I struggle with this one. I expected to see 3 linebackers on a depth chart. Right. I expected to see 3 true options. I think Justin Cryer makes a lot of sense. I think Elijah Herring makes a lot of sense. I think we felt Blake Nicholson was going to be a backup. And then, again, the question is, Stephon Thompson, how much does he play? Because that's a green dot type of guy. We haven't maybe discussed this a lot in stories or on podcasts, but who is going to be wearing that green dot? Who is the coach on the field who's listening to Tony White? Or is that John Papuchis, whoever? Probably Tony White, though, I would think. Who's going to be the coach on the field? It could be Elijah Herring. He's got some 3-3-5 experience with Memphis. I guess it could be James Williams, too. But you start thinking about coaches on the field, getting guys aligned right pre-snap, being very important when you're facing an Alabama team. It's your first game. You got so many new pieces around you. So I think JP sold us on the experience and the depth of this group. And then you see an AJ Cottrell and you go, huh.
Yeah.
But when he said 6 guys, I was counting AJ Cottrell as among those potential 6 guys as a linebacker too.
Right. Well, also, is this a similar situation to, we were talking, I forgot what position group earlier, where somebody's injured and somebody takes that. Caleb Valley is a guy that I think they expected to be in the spot, but he not only was injured in spring, he's continued to be injured limited in fall. Does he line up in that spot if he's completely healthy? I would have to imagine that he was or would and will be in the future. But that's no knock against AJ Cottrell, who again has shown repeatedly over the years that he's been here that he's going to give you reps that are full effort, full contact. Maybe not last season when full contact was discouraged by the former defensive coordinator in power. That being said, he was going to give you those reps. So maybe that has something to do with Caleb not being available for this early part of the season. At least we assume it's going to extend through the early part of the season. Maybe this was truly earned. It'll be interesting to see. I do think Stephon Thompson at Jack is kind of one of those kind of moments where you tilt your head and say, that's not where I expected you to be. But again, to your point earlier, is this really geared towards Alabama where you're going to be facing against a competent running attack with a maul of an offensive line, and you're going to need some of those heavier, more brooding linebackers at the second level? We've touched on the defensive backfield a little bit. I think Jabril Rawls and Jerry Wilson were easy shoe-ins to be starting at both the boundary corner positions. A little bit surprised to see Charles Lester there as the backup to Jabril. I can't lie. I was expecting it to either be Quindarius Jones, who is listed as with an OR designation there, but also was expecting Kai Bates to show up somewhere, and he's not on the 2 deep. Now, it is worth noting that Norvell did say, and I don't know if it was specifically Norvell, might have been Surtain as well. The sense is that this defensive backfield is going to be changing a lot in terms of who's on this two deep. I think you have a bunch of second-year guys like Ricky Knight, like Kai, like Jamari Howard. Now, Jamari is obviously extremely set back because he was out for the season last year. But you have guys that are going to be on scout team this year that may poke up every now and again on this two deep. So it's not like this is going to remain the two deep at the defensive back position until, you both shall live and say I do, right? But Charles Lester being there and not Kai Bates was an eye catcher for me. And above Quindarius Jones, and again, there's an or designation there. How you want to take that is up to you. Are you as surprised as I am to see Charles Lester there?
Honestly, and this is terrible to admit, but I forgot about Kai Bates in the whole process of the discussion because I wasn't comparing the roster and who wasn't on here. But I'm with you. I think Florida State's got a lot of options. I mean, could you see a Max Redmond jump up as a safety type? Are there more younger guys that we just haven't seen enough of, whether it was last year or they're true freshmen, who this depth chart is going to twist and turn, and we're going to see how many different changes can we see in this depth chart, not just week 1, week 2, week 3, but it could really evolve because the competition could be a lot better across a lot of these position groups. I saw Charles Lester in person in high school. There's an athlete there. There's no doubt what he can do on the football field. Complete respect for him. I think he could play. He could be a returner. Right? There's talent there for sure. I just don't know. I haven't thought it through as far as, is Q better because Q's got a little bit more experience. Where's Kai Bates, in that competition with Lester? Just a lot of different options, and that's a good thing too, right? Like if your favorite prospect out of high school isn't on this depth chart, don't go, oh man. I think this is a good thing that there is this level of competition.
Absolutely. Trenton with the comment of the day that it's a question that I think this entire fan base is asking this morning when they take a look at the depth chart. We've talked about it a little bit already, but just because we're back on the topic again, who the heck is Donnie Hybert and what is he doing on my depth chart? Another one of these walk-ons that has found themselves with the starting position here, or not a starting position, but mentioned on the two deep. My kind of thinking is, well, this is Conrad Hussey, but he was dismissed off the team a week and a half ago. This would have been where Conrad Hussey lined up potentially. But it's still kind of like from the top row, off the rafters, completely out of left field. You poll every single FSU beat reporter, whether it's us, whether it's War Chant, whether it's the Null 247 guys, Null Game Day, whatever have you. 0.0% of us would have predicted that Donnie Hybert would have been on the two deep this morning. But here he is, the boogeyman. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know what to tell you. This isn't even something that, full transparency, at least for us, we even heard as a possibility. for like there was no mention of him by the coaching staff. Oh, I thought Donnie Herbert has done really good in practice over the last 3 weeks. Is it a placeholder? I don't want to be disrespectful to Donnie because obviously you have to be able to play at Florida State, right? But Bob, help me out here. I don't think anybody knows where this came from. Is this purely a situation where, hey, this was going to be Conrad Hussey's spot and now he's off the football team and we need somebody to place there? Is this a situation where Donnie has come in and truly earned the starting position? Is this more of a formality where Earl is going to be on that field 99.9% of those snaps? And hey, if Earl happens to go down, Donnie's going to be the next man up? Or are we truly going to live in a reality and not a simulation where they're going to be rotating guys and it's going to be Donnie Hybert out there with Shaheem Brown and KJ Kirkland on that second team?
I think we see a ton of Earl Little. I think that's the first answer.
That's the safe bet.
Right. Now, Donnie, okay, I'm just looking up his stats because I had no idea. I'm not sure I've ever interviewed Donnie. And I think it's Hebert, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyway,
I think so too.
Donnie's played a lot of special teams. He's had 15 tackles. I bet you almost all of those are on special teams, and it wasn't like a fourth quarter mop up time type tackle.
Well, it certainly wasn't last year. I could tell you that much.
Yeah, I think this was the most left field because it just wasn't a name you heard a lot about. I'm sorry, you hadn't heard anything about in camp. And part of this maybe too, let's be honest, media being boxed out except for just what you hear, what your sources are telling you. And I'm not asking my sources, hey, Donnie Hebert, what do you think? Because that doesn't come up. That's not part of your fact checking and your auditing of the coaching staff. But let's go back to it. I think this staff loves Earl Little.
Yes.
I think Earl Little is a leader. I would not. I bet if we take the total snap counts for FSU on defense and the total snap counts that Earl Little plays, it's going to be pretty darn close to identical. I think that's the answer we're going to find.
Yeah, maybe this is an NFL situation where, hey, you do well on special teams, you get the opportunity to do more. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be fascinating to see. Number 47 potentially line up in that defensive backfield from Florida State. To round out everything here, I don't think there's anything else in the defensive secondary that necessarily jumps off the page at you. We've talked about Shaheem already being behind Ashlyn Barker. Maybe a little bit surprised to see an or next to Edwin Joseph and KJ Kirkland. You would have thought that it would have been Earl, Edwin, KJ in those starting positions across Rover safety and then the other safety. That or distinction. And again, depending on who you ask and how you want to feel about it, that or distinction carries a lot of weight or it carries absolutely no weight whatsoever. Well, now that I look at Shamar Arnaud on the 2 deep as a true freshman defensive back, doesn't happen very often. When's the last true defenseman or God? When's the last true freshman defensive back we got at that time to have the potential starting playing time? Is it Jalen Ramsey? Or
because of injury, Jalen Ramsey started his first game. Jalen Ramsey started at Pittsburgh 2013. Now, A.Z. Thomas played a little bit, true freshman, but I mean, that wasn't a guy you counted on and he even started all that much until... It might
be Derwin.
Oh, boy. Yeah, I think the staff likes Shamar Arnaud. I think I asked the question to the coaching staff, Pat Surtain included. Do you still look at him as a freshman? Do you have reservations about putting him out there against an Alabama? Again, the opponent, I think, might make some decisions about you want guys with experience out there. So I think they still view him as a freshman. He still makes freshman mistakes. When you hear that admission voluntarily, you take it with a grain of salt. He needs experience. Yeah. I still would say, how much do we see of Shamar Arnaud week 1 versus he gets a lot of experience in these guarantee games. I've been beating that drum consistently, but if you're going to pay almost $2 million to face East Texas A&M and Kent State, you better get guys some valuable playing time because that's where you get your money's worth. You want to get backups and just get them experience because that makes them feel better about the work they put in on the practice field.
If you're watching on the Osceola YouTube channel right now, first of all, thank you so much for participating in the show. If you have any questions about this 2 deep, have any questions about what we think about the game coming on Saturday, anything that jumps off of you on the page that you want to ask us about, now is the time to do so before we close out the show. Bob, your final thoughts on this depth chart, your biggest surprise when looking at this depth chart, probably, I mean, I don't even want to ask you that. It's going to be Donnie Hebert. Let's ask you a different question. I guess your biggest takeaway when looking at this depth chart, do you feel like looking at this depth chart that everything has, like the puzzle pieces are all forming together to make a roster that you feel is going to be more competitive in 2025 than it was last season?
I think for almost every position, it feels sensible. Like I can sit here and explain the reasoning of the coaches, the why makes sense. Again, we've hit on Donnie quite a bit. I think that's one that doesn't make as much sense because we didn't see preseason camp. We kind of hit on Chase Lofton a lot already, but Chase makes a lot of sense. It truly, truly does. I think, again, big storylines. We know there's a ton of ors here. Mike Norvell loves them, but he's getting a lot of freshmen, getting those freshmen out there. We're going to see freshmen against Alabama. I think that's a huge, huge thing for this coaching staff, just to be able to again say to all these prospects, 100 or more of them, hey, you've got a chance to play early, and not just, again, not against a bad team, but against potentially Alabama. You're going to get out there and see them. It feels like I'd almost be curious to see these two depth charts side by side. Like, what was the Florida State Georgia Tech depth chart from last August next to this one? Because
might be able to find that.
They don't look at all the same, right? I mean, this is completely turned over. So in addition to a new coaching staff, in addition to new coordinators, new players, all these transfers, all these freshmen, I mean, I would venture a guess, besides Roydell Williams and Darrell Jackson, there aren't that many guys that we saw week 1 against Georgia Tech, and they are back on this depth chart. Now, don't think Juice Cryer played against Georgia Tech, for example. I think Omar Graham did. But there's a lot on this depth chart that is totally, totally new. And how that continuity works, how that communication works, who's got the green dot. There's a lot of just intrigue, right, over just how this all looks on paper on Monday.
Let me see if I can pull this up really quickly, because I'm actually fascinated to see. Let me see. Hold your horses. Stop right there. Or not so fast. What was it, Lee? Not so fast. There we go. Is it going to show up in the download on the depth chart? It's showing up as a what? Here, you know what? We're going to do a read here. We're going to do a read real quick. Apologies for not being able to put computer's just being little bit fussy here, right? Yep. Computers have Mondays too. At quarterback, DJ Uyagale, Brock Glenn, Luke Kromenhoek, Roydell Williams, Keziah Holmes, Cam Davis, and there's an or between Keziah Holmes and Cam Davis at that first running back position. Lawrence Toafili, Jalen Lucas, Sam Singleton. So now looking at this here, it does make sense that Jalen Lucas is at the running back position, even though he was working a lot with the wide receivers. So, you're putting square pegs in round holes, and somehow that square peg is fitting. In other words, boy, is this a whiplash. Get ready for this. Malik
Offensive
Benson,
line.
Kentron Portier, or Hakeem Williams at that first wide receiver position. That second wide receiver position, Ja'Kai Douglas, Deuce Spann, Elijah Moore. That third wide receiver position, Jaylen Brown, Darion Williamson, or LaWayne McCoy. So obviously LaWayne not available for this upcoming season opener against Alabama. He's going to be back sooner rather than later, according to the Florida State coaching staff. Are you ready for more whiplash, Bob? Kyle Morlock, Brian Courtney, or Jackson West at tight end. Which is wow. Darius Washington, Lucas Simmons at left tackle, Richie Leonard IV, Bryson Estes at left guard, Maurice Smith, Andre Otto, or Jacob Rizzi at center. Obviously, I think it's an interesting distinction. Jacob Rizzi with an or tag in this depth chart at left guard and right guard, not center, although they do like him at both. So interesting that they're going more towards the center side of things, or excuse me, the guard side of things. Keandre Jones or TJ Ferguson at right guard. Jeremiah Byers, Robert Scott, Jalen Early at right tackle. God, looking back, Bob, what the hell were they doing at right tackle?
It's the entire depth chart. It's almost the entire offensive depth chart. That's
it is
or 3D.
Now, to be fair to Robert Scott, he was so injured that him being on the field was an act of God. I mean, like, he was not supposed to be playing. But Jeremiah Byers was a whole different degree of booty on the football field that they almost needed him to play it sometimes. And then Jalen Early, obviously. It's hard to say what a loss that is because you really don't know what he would have done this season. But you still hope that he would have been here, right? You still hope that he would have had a role here. The whiplash gets worse, Bob. It gets worse. Now, obviously, different defensive schemes. It's not going to line up 100% the same way here. Weak side defensive end, Patrick Payton, Sione Lolohea. God, Patrick Payton isn't a name that I've thought about in a long time. First defensive tackle position, Josh Farmer, KJ Sampson, Tomiwa Durajayi. Now, that's a name I also haven't heard in a long time. Where did he go? Did he go back to the Big 12? Did he go back to West Virginia? Look that up for me real quick.
I'm going Google.
Holy moly. Daryl Jackson Jr., Daniel Lyons. Hey, you know what? That one's not so different. Until you get to
Illinois. Illinois.
Okay. That part's not so different until you get to Grady Kelly. 6'2", 295 pounds. Look that one up too. God, where did he go? Strong side defensive end, Marvin Jones Jr., Byron Turner Jr. The juniors of former players that just, or not Byron Turner wasn't his father wasn't a former Seminole. I'm thinking of Boots. I'm thinking of Lamont.
Grady Kelly.
Linebacker.
Michigan State for Grady Kelly.
Okay. Linebacker, the first linebacker position. Cam Riley, Blake Nicholson, DeMarco Ward. DJ Lundy, Omar Graham, or Justin Cryer for the second linebacker position. It's funny because you take a look at the linebacker room from this year to last year, and it's like you look back at last year, like the names there don't sound bad in terms of like experience, but then you watch whatever that vomit was on the field in Ireland, and you're just like, Jesus Christ. I guess the caveat in the context is that DJ Lundy was also banged up, if I remember correctly, and he shouldn't have been playing in Ireland either, but he played injured. Not to excuse the play that DJ Lundy had in his final season, of course. Nickel. There's no nickel on the current depth chart, but last year, and if you're just joining us here at the end, we're going through last year's depth chart compared to this year's depth chart. At nickel cornerback, Kevin Knowles II or Earl Little Jr. or Jabril Rawls. So look, similar names here, but obviously Jabril getting the starting nod this year. Far side corner, Fentrell Cypress II, Quindarius Jones, Kai Bates. No Charles Lester. Or at least not in that position, sorry. He is later down the depth chart. Buck safety. Strong side safety for the less educated, including myself. Shaheem Brown, KJ Kirkland. Free safety, Devontae Brown or Conrad Hussey. Wow. And then, of course, the other cornerback position you'd have is R.A. Thomas, Edwin Joseph, or Charles Lester III. How's that for some whiplash, huh? That's almost frightening. That is frightening. That is a horror show in terms of flipped production or flipped rosters. Names that were so irrelevant on that football team that you almost forgot they existed. And this is coming from people that cover this team for a living. I would not blame anybody as a fan who does not remember who the hell Tomiwa Durajayi was or Brian Courtney or Jackson West, who I think Brian Courtney went to Western Kentucky or something like that. Or maybe that was Jackson West, one of the two, or like a Devontae Brown. To think that they almost brought in Devontae Brown the previous season, not last season, the year before that, before he went to Miami. And I don't know what Mario Cristobal did with him that messed him up so bad. If that is what happened. And I mean, we didn't talk about it here, but Ryan Fitzgerald, Alex Mastermano, your specialist, best position group on the team. And your kick returners, there are no kick returners here on this depth chart. I just realized that. I don't know. I don't know what I don't think they're hiding anything. It might just be an omission, but, Jalen Lucas, Deuce Spann is your kick returner on the 2024 depth chart. Roy Dell Williams and Keziah Holmes at kick returner is really funny. And then your punt returner, Malik Benson or Jalen Lucas or Luane McCoy. Obviously, Luane McCoy took over that position as the season went on. Well, that was an absolutely disgusting and horrifying run down memory lane. That is wild. You don't realize how much that roster has changed until you put it side by side. It genuinely is. What was the magic number, Bob? 40? 40 guys? Around there?
Yeah, I think it might have hit 44 when you count high school, junior college edition, transfer portal. And now North Carolina, Bill Belichick hit the reset button at 70 new players because he talked about this at the ACC kickoff. 70 is a lot. But when you talk about just a depth chart turnover like this, I've been covering this program a long time. And Nick, you've been following this program for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we've seen this type of depth chart turnover. Yes, there was coaching change there from Jimbo to Taggart to Norvell, but I don't think we saw this type of dramatic turnover, starters, backups, reserves.
And you know what's funny is, and I don't know if you feel this way too, but it felt like it could have been worse. It felt like it could have been worse in terms of guys leaving, because like there was smoke, and I expect there to be smoke again this offseason. But I remember all of this smoke and mirrors that Surtain was going to take another head coaching job, or he wanted to go to the NFL. And if that happens, that defensive back room, all hell breaks loose, right?
Yes.
But and not to say that there were guys that you lost last offseason that you really didn't want to lose, a la Luke Kromenhoek, a la Jalen Early. There are definitely some pieces that you lost last portal season that you didn't want to lose, but it just didn't feel like a whole lot left. But you still bring in so many new players, and it even still, it feels like such a completely new roster. And maybe that is truly college football in 2025. But don't you think this could have been worse? And by worse, I mean in terms of Bill Belichick reaching 70 new players on your roster, right? Feels like it could have been worse, doesn't it?
And I hate to play the what if games. I'm happy he's on this roster. People are still going to be skeptical of Darrell Jackson until they see it week in, week out with some type of consistency. Right. But he was entered into the NFL draft. Now, the timeline of when did these conversations happen with Odell and Coach Knighton and Coach Norvell, there were discussions that he might still jump in the portal even after he had, said, I'm going to go look at the NFL draft. What if you lose a potential centerpiece like a Darrell Jackson, and you're a centerpiece in a 3-3-5 if you are 337 pounds of Darrell Jackson? So yeah, I mean, there could have been a lot more change, and still it feels. But I think you're right. I think this is a little bit of college football in 2025. I wrote about this a month, two, whatever back. I think if you came back, if you lived through 13-1 and 2-10, and you have eligibility left and you want to be here and Mike Norvell wants you to be here, it says a little bit about you as a human being and your character. I know there's a lot of people off that 2-10 roster that you probably wish were gone, right? But it does say something about, hey, you're still here, you're still working. Nothing was given, not a starting job was given to you in December by staying, but you're back. So I think there is a little bit of that mindset discussion to me that I think is really interesting about those guys who came back and have kind of lived through the true roller coaster of the highs and lows. But I hadn't thought about it until we were talking it through and comparing that depth chart. It's just an insanely dramatic turnaround.
We've definitely gone over our time allotment here, but I felt like that was worth it. That was great. I enjoyed that very thoroughly. It's almost time, ladies and gentlemen. It is almost time for Florida State football. August 30th is just around the corner. It's the perfect time to join the Osceola.com. You can get 30% off an annual subscription and get a $25 voucher to Alumni Hall with that subscription to the Osceola. It's a great deal. Take advantage of it. Get that $25 voucher. Come see a game in the newly renovated Joe Campbell Stadium. Spend your money on some merchandise. hey, if you got kids, get them something nice to remember their experience by. That $25 voucher to Alumni Hall, it's definitely going to help. But of course, what's going to help you even more is an Osceola subscription. So you can get content like this. You can get writing from Bob and myself and Jerry and all the news that you expect from Florida State athletics. No BS, no clickbait, everything that you need to know. Newsletter every single day, Bob. Newsletter every single day with exactly what you need to know about Florida State athletics. I'm excited. I really am excited. It's almost here. You can feel it. You can feel it tinkling.
It feels like it was the longest offseason. I think we said this last week. Has this not been the longest offseason from the end of 2024 to now? Because, again, you don't have a bowl game. You've got the coaching searches on the assistants and what's going to happen in the portal, the revolving door there. It feels like it has taken us forever to get to game week, but we're here, thankfully, mercifully, finally.
More on the Osceola.com. Norvell is going to be meeting with us a couple more times this week. We're going to get some more players this week. There's going to be a ton of more content on the Osceola. We're going too fast. Trying to end the show too fast here. There's going to be more content on the Osceola.com and the Osceola YouTube channel. So make sure you're subscribed there or subscribe here and subscribe to the Osceola as well. Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. We'll be back later in the week before kickoff. My name is Nick Carlisle, staff writer and recruiting writer for the Osceola.com. That is Bob Ferrante, the head editor. Have a great rest of your Monday. Try to contain your excitement. Florida State football is almost back. We'll see you all another time.